Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you got a little snack or something to pick you up in the middle of the morning. I trust that you have been enjoying the session so far. A lot of useful information. Please be reminded that we will have all of these information available to you after the summit, as well as there will be some sessions this afternoon that will expand on some of those things we talked about this morning. And of course, you'll have more time in those sessions to ask maybe some of the questions that maybe you just think about just now, or maybe were not answered fully that you'd like a little clarification on. So welcome to this next session on national and regional open data sources and use of those data. We have three wonderful presenters with us this morning. Wayne, of course, you've already met. And before we start, we'll go through the poll questions. So can we ask the poll questions? The first question, coffee or tea? You just had a break. So do you consider yourself to be a coffee or a tea person? Most people either say I'm a coffee fanatic or I'm a tea enthusiast, or maybe you don't drink either. Wow, overwhelmingly 50%, well, at least 50% are coffee drinkers, 27, about half, evenly split between tea, people who prefer tea, and people who don't drink neither, so they drink water. I personally am a tea person, so I love my green tea. Unfortunately, I don't have any right now, but I hope that the coffee drinkers were able to get a coffee during the break and you have a lot of energy for this next session. Are we going through the other poll question? Yes. The next question, which of these sources have you accessed data from? From the SIB, from BIRDS, the Belize Environmental Resource, I forgot the last name, Elections and Boundaries, National Meteorological Service, none. Have you accessed data from any of these sources? BIRDS is the Biodiversity and Environmental Resource Data Systems of Belize. SIB, the Statistical Institute, Elections and Boundaries Department, National Meteorological Service. Oh, most people, good amount of people, 47% of the participants have access data from SIB. And of course, that's our main national data source. So your demographic data, census data, all of that data, I'm sure that people have accessed before. Some people, 11% have access data that's mostly spatial data from the Biodiversity Resource System and Environmental and Resource Data System. Some people have access election data, 11%. Some people have gotten climate data from National Meteorological Service, but there are about 26% of the participants said that they have never used any of these data sources. Well, hopefully you'll be able to use them soon. The next question is your organization using or creating geospatial data? And the options are yes, no, or maybe you don't even know what is the geospatial data, but we'll answer a couple of those questions if you don't. So by the end of this session, you would certainly know what it is and how you could use it within your organization. Well, 29% says yes, they are using geospatial data. 35% said no, and another 35% said, what is geospatial data? So as I get into my, my brief introduction, I'll touch a little bit about what is geospatial data, and maybe you can see how it's useful for you in your organization. So thank you. And for participating in the poll questions, a little interaction as we begin the session. Can I have the slides, Shane? This session, as I mentioned before, is on national and regional open data sources and how you can use the data. Next slide, please. Okay, so like just now we had a poll question on whether you prefer coffee or tea. And so the responses that we would get from that would constitute data, because we could know for if we're having a session next time that people are present, whether we should prepare more coffee or more tea. So that's a little introduction to data and what it is, why it is so valuable to us as civil society organizations. We will go through a little bit about of the vocabulary before I get into the presentations. Next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned, some of these terms you're hearing, I know Wayne mentioned in the very beginning. Some of you may not have been here for the very start of the session. He mentioned what is open data. So before we get into the presentation, we'll just go through a bit of those terminologies. Next slide. Data. So what is data? Data is basically facts, figures, statistics collected together for reference or analysis. So you're observing different things using a certain methodology, and you collect the information. There are a variety of different types of data and different ways to represent data. Sometimes it's usually numerical, quantitative data. It can be simply units of information. It's employed in all aspects in scientific research, business management. You need to collect data on what people are buying, revenue, profits, etc. Finance and governance, things like crime rates, unemployment rates, literacy rates, and every other form of human organization. You need data. For example, a nonprofit that is serving people in need might need to know where those people are, what are their needs, and so forth. So data is measured, collected, reported, and analyzed. It can be visualized using things like graphs, images, etc. Next slide, please. Okay, so we add another term to that, open data. So what is open data? Open data is data that anyone can access, can use, and it can share it. It's very, very powerful because it can assist organizations to be organizations that don't collect data but need data to use that data for decision making, for advocacy, and so forth. So there is a big push. It allows greater participation of citizens. The availability of the data empowers people. And most of that open data is usually now digitally accessed. Next slide, please. So we add another term to that, and that is source, open data source. So what is an open data source? It's basically where you can find data sets. You can find them on websites, on online portals. And I found this particular website, Open Data Soft, that maps some of the different data portals throughout the world globally. And it has over 2,500 different open data portals around the world. For Belize, there were 3. The Belize Meteorological Service, they also had the Belize Elections and Boundaries Department website on there. And I believe one more. But there are other data sources in Belize that we can, that they would need to add because there are more than just those 3. But depending on the data that you need for the region, for the country, there are different sources that you can find online. Next slide, please. Open data use. So what do you use the data for? Well, basically anything. Governments can use the data, businesses can use the data to decide where they want to go in terms of providing a service. Civil society, which this summit is about, also utilize a lot of data to make decisions, to form their policies and their programs. And individuals as well can use data to bring about social, economic, and environmental benefits for all. For example, during the COVID pandemic, which we're still facing, a lot of information, a lot of data was being shared with people so that people can be informed. For example, maps of where there's spread or information. I know the Ministry of Health, and we'll have a presentation from them later in the session, share daily infographics that provides data on number of cases who have recovered, male versus female, and so forth. So data, that is very important data as we try to manage the pandemic. So open data, using open data can bring about a lot of benefits for everyone. Next slide, please. And lastly, as we asked in the poll, do you use geospatial data? What is geospatial data? Well, basically, it's just data that has a geographic component to it. It has location. So this means that it records in the data set some type of information that shows you where in a particular area on the globe that the data is tied to. So it has coordinates, maybe address, zip code, etc. And in our world today, geospatial data has a very, very important place. Now, recently we have had GPS locating device that you can put in your cars, on your phones, that guides you to, for example, if you're looking for where an NGO is located, you can put in, if that information is available, you can put it in your phone and they can guide you to the location of that place. So other NGOs, for example, environmental NGOs, BOP in particular, because we deal with planning that looks at space. We use a lot of geospatial data. Some of the data has to be obtained from government sources, and some of it you can create yourself. And so we hope that in some ways, other organizations would be able to use and create geospatial data to benefit the community. For example, the Belize Assembly of Persons with Diverse Ability might need to know where their members are located in the event of emergency response, need for emergency response during a hurricane or something like that. So geospatial data is very key in our world today. And next slide, please. What are some of those open data sources that we have nationally? We have the Statistical Institute of Belize, who will have a presentation from shortly. Biodiversity and Environmental Resource Data System of Belize Bears. This is a very good resource for baseline spatial data on Belize. You can get the shape files of the countries, shape files of the rivers and the villages and the towns and so forth. Elections and boundary, if you need election data, climate data from Belize Meteorological Service, Belize Crime Observatory for crime data. So these are just some of the sources locally for open data.